Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sunday Matinee. I'm your host, Ben Stahl. This is episode 53. The road to 100 continues today. And I'm really excited because rather than talk about a specific film or television series, we are touching on a very broad topic today. I love that. It means that I don't have to get frustrated about what Marvel is doing with their films at this point in time. So, before we jump into everything, I should, of course, introduce the panel. Returning for the first time since, I want to say, January, February. Hey, everybody, it's Gary Chambers.
Hey, Gary. Everybody. Good to see you, sort of, in not quite real time.
And returning in an episode that definitely spins out of, I would say, the Obi-Wan spoiler cast we did not too long ago. Kyle Sinclair is back. Hello, Kyle.
Hi, thank you. Good to be here. My name is Gary Chambers. I have beautiful flowing hair, and I've been here since January. It's good to be here.
My name is Kyle Sinclair, and I'm the best actor in Puget Sound right now.
If you are listening to this episode, everyone is making fun of each other, and it's wonderful. So,
I do have beautiful flowing hair, though.
Well, for now.
Of course, before we jump into our main topic for the day, we are going to talk about what's going on in the news. And this week, one story in particular stood out above the rest. A story that, when it broke, shook Hollywood and just has been an interesting thing to follow ever since. So, about the middle of last week, Warner Brothers Discovery, yes, they are now a single company, Discovery and Warner Brothers, under new management, and they have opted to shelve the DC film Batgirl, which was nearly completed, slated to deliver on HBO Max. Its budget had ballooned slightly during the pandemic to cover the costs of being shut down for a while, and new management has decided that going forward, all DC films should have a theatrical feel, and they felt that Batgirl did not make that cut. Now, I'm not talking about this story specifically because it's a superhero film, because this is not the only project over at Warner Brothers that got the axe. A new animated Scooby-Doo film, also nearing the end of its production cycle, was also inexplicably pulled. And one of the things that these executives have decided is that these films are projected to underperform. So the best thing that they can do is pull them and then write them down on the taxes. And that is how they are going to best make money off of them, which the creative community has definitely responded to that. It's not unusual to see a studio shelve a project. It is unusual to see them shelve it that late in production. And it boggles my mind that they would do this, particularly with a superhero film, in an age where we've had other studios say, let's throw this ragtag team of space heroes together that no one in the world knows about. Or over at Sony, let's release this Jared Leto vampire film that surely will be the pinnacle of cinema. And Warner Brothers is scared about a Batman associated superhero project. They also, the same week, removed 6 films from the HBO Max streaming service. And what's unusual about it is they didn't announce this. They just disappeared. And now the worry is that these 6 underperforming films, as well as other projects that have been released on the streaming service, are also going to get written down on taxes. Now, what this ultimately means is the studio will not be able to use these films, these television shows, to be monetized, which means they can never be put back on a streaming service. They can never be released to theaters. They can't sell them off to another studio. The only thing they could potentially do is release them online for free, but hey, it's a film studio. They're not going to do that. So there's been a little bit of a backlash. Warner Brothers stock has gone down. Like I said, the creative community is not terribly thrilled about what's going on. You don't want your project to get so far along and then have it pulled. I can only imagine the precedent this may set for Netflix, which has a ton of, and I hate to use this word, but it's the big buzzword when it comes to streaming content. Netflix has plenty of stuff that is underperforming because, quite frankly, they don't do a good job advertising their product unless it's Stranger Things or Bridgerton or the one or two big shows they have. This couldn't, I could foresee Netflix pulling this exact same thing because they are also currently struggling to keep subscribers up. So, yeah, I just wanted to get, Gary, I want to jump to you first. What are your thoughts on this whole debacle?
Okay. Batgirl and Scoob underperforming is an alternative word for saying that the films suck. I don't think that the first Scoob did very well. It certainly wasn't critically well received. I think that there were early signs on the wall that the DC property that they had was not a good script. And I think it was, to be a dissenter in this particular argument, while I understand what the creatives are going through when they have a property that they're trying to make the best use of, and make a property or extend an IP that can at least go into an extended universe or perhaps fit itself into the mainstream universe of DC. But if you've got films that depart from the universe so badly because the films just don't pass muster, it doesn't further the universe's narrative. Shut it down before it can do any damage is my take. I think it was the right call if indeed the executives determined that the films just weren't good.
Kyle, what are your thoughts on this developing story?
Exactly the same. Yeah, if the movie was bad, take it off. If they've already had so many misfires, like I appreciate that they have some kind of executive creative judgment happening here. On the note of content, Netflix's thing has always been like quantity over quality, and so it doesn't really matter if they yank something unless it is like The Office or some major property that they've been using. So all of this, it's something that we deal with in the gaming community too, the preservation aspect. Like old Flash games can no longer be run on almost any modern hardware just because Flash has been depreciated. So from a preservation standpoint, in the age of streaming, when things can just be yanked arbitrarily or for whatever tax reasons, it really lends credence to the piracy aspect. If you cannot legally obtain this content anywhere else, then I would argue that it is like justified to be able to pirate things. Same with retro video games, etc. If they're going to take them away and we want to enjoy the content, and there is no legal way to obtain it, then that is how you would get it.
Yeah, under normal circumstances, I do not advocate for piracy, but like you just said, if it's not there, if they're not providing it in any way, then yeah, it's open sailing from here on out. I should note that the 6 films that they pulled off of HBO Max are currently available in a physical format, so you can get them right now. Whether or not that's true, a few months from now, we shall see.
And it's that FOMO aspect, I think, that a lot of collectors fear is the unavailability at a future date. It may be available now, but that's no guarantee that as IP moves from company to company, that their accessibility will still be retained. I think particularly, and I'm addressing this with a bit of an assumptive tone, that Americans in particular like to own or think that we own what we watch. And so there's an attraction to media, an attraction to having it so that it can't be taken away. Not that that is not a political hot button issue right now, but it certainly transcends into entertainment.
Yeah, I was going to say, not to get too off track, I feel like the mindset has completely shifted now where everything is streaming and we own little.
Yeah, exactly. But we could make this a 12-hour show really easily. I'll let the moderator continue.
Well, I'll point out too that you know, even in the days, and I'm still a collector of physical media, even in the days of physical media when it was in its prime, you still had to get it at some point because it is going to be discontinued. Even physical media, it does not last forever.
Unless we get
I'm
into
a
the Disney
particular
Vault.
yes, but yeah. The last part of the story I would like to address is that they did have Warner Brothers Discovery did have their sort of quarterly earnings statement, that their presentation, and the one part of that I want to point out that really disappointed me was they had a slide of HBO Max and Discovery, and on that slide they legitimately said that HBO Max content is meant to skew male audiences and Discovery content is meant to skew female audiences. And I just think that is a bit of a blind spot there because I don't know. I don't know. The stuff I've been watching on HBO Max most recently are Flag Means Death, Harley Quinn. Like that really skews an incredibly broad audience, not just what I'm assuming they are targeting, cis males. So I don't know.
I
I
have
think
any
that's
statistics in front of me, but it's when I think of Discovery in terms of branding, I think of Ice Road Truckers, I think of Deadliest Catch, which, for 14, 15 years, if not longer, as something that I've chosen to watch, and I watch very limited amount of television. As you had pointed out, Kyle, that we're in an age of new content, of a glut of really well-produced, well-written content. And now we have to make choices as opposed to the vast wasteland in which we once immersed ourselves every night with impunity. Now we're actually face-to-face with analysis paralysis because there is so much good content. But it seems like these executives don't necessarily know what content that they have if they're purporting to just target a specific audience, leaving the previous audience in the dust while they're still marketing that existing product vis-a-vis the male skewing programming on Discovery. I think that to have a broader audience makes sense until you can refine it into something that is more targeted towards the viewers that you want.
Well, it's a crazy story. It just blew up on Twitter, and that's the reason I picked it out. And there was just this panic the day it happened. This sense that what is now safe on HBO Max is Harley Quinn going to keep on going because is it underperforming? There's been so much fear the past few days. I don't want to see HBO Max lose its identity because in terms of what's available to watch on there, it has been one of my favorite streaming services in the last year. So I hope that this merger and all these decisions do not change what it has become. Because if I had to choose right now, I would choose HBO Max over Netflix. Simple as that.
Let's just not forget how fast things change, because Warner Brothers was known as AOL not that long ago.
This is a while ago. But there's also the possibility, like, just to be cynical, that this is a marketing thing. And they're saying, oh, we're going to take Batgirl from you. And then after the fan backlash, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, you really want to see this. Here, you can see this. And then
you can see this 1.5-star animated film that was made on a subpar budget with a subpar script.
Exactly. Like, pump the numbers that way.
Right.
But yeah, that could potentially tarnish the reputation, and people would watch it and go, oh, that's why. Yeah. Okay. That may just backfire.
Well, like I said, I'm less concerned about the quality of the film as I am the potential of this sort of scaring off. I don't think it's going to scare off big filmmakers if they were to approach Spielberg and say, could you make a film for us? They're not going to cancel that. But up and coming filmmakers may get scared off by this if they're approached by Warner Brothers in the future and say, hey, would you like to do this small budget film for us over at HBO Max? So it'll be interesting. It is also just a shame that we're losing Batgirl and we are losing, I know he should be returning in The Flash at some point, but this was slated to be the return of Michael Keaton as Batman for DC, and that was something that excited me. It was going to be Brendan Fraser was going to be appearing as the villain in his first high-profile role in quite a while. So I feel bad for the people who are involved in making this film. I hope this isn't something that we're going to be seeing a lot of going down the road. The three of us, we're all in theater. We were all either involved with a production or knew someone who was involved with a production that was shut down in March 2020 and never came back. Granted, that was for much better reasons than what Warner Brothers is doing here, but we know what it's like to lose something and never have it see the light of day.
We were one day away from having an audience. One day. It was the next day, and they shut it down. And now our Matilda has grown out of the role, and it'll never happen.
I'm just on the verge of tears, and my previous comment has been validated. Oh.
So that is the story of the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, the loss of Batgirl, this crazy, weird shakeup that's been going on. But let's talk about what we've been watching this last week. I haven't had much time to watch anything before the weekend because I'm in rehearsal for a show. But I was able to rewatch this weekend Mission Impossible Fallout. I've been watching the last couple Mission Impossibles of late, and oh boy, do they hold up. I love them so much. It's also fun to after the glut of, and I'm sorry I keep bashing Marvel here. I love their films, but it's fun to watch action films that aren't just bombarding your eyes with CG effects and knowing that, hey, that's Tom Cruise or one of his amazing stuntmen literally riding that motorcycle and doing all those amazing crashes and insane things. And of course, this is the one where he actually broke his leg, I believe, doing a jump. So I just love a good old classic action film. And for whatever reason, as crazy as Tom Cruise is, I love these films. Gary, have you been watching anything awesome this last week?
As anybody who's watched this show and has been able to get a half an eyelid open knows, I'm kind of a documentary junkie. And the most recent documentary I've been watching, I want to make sure I get the title right. It's called Mr. A and Mr. M, the story of A&M Records. That's the most recent documentary that I have been following. And what makes this particular documentary interesting is that these are the two nicest guys in the industry. In an industry, both film and records, in which you're just watching for the next takeover or watching for the next malfeasance or watching for the next opportunity to screw someone over, these two men in their high profile executive positions did nothing but nurture creativity during their entire careers. And fun fact, they actually bought and occupied the old Charlie Chaplin studio. And just from that aspect alone, the ground in which A&M Records occupied had such a storied history is fascinating all by itself. But it's a fantastic documentary if you can find it.
All right, I'm going to keep that one in mind because I love good documentary, Gary, just like you. I just don't seek them out the way you do with such gusto.
Thank you, Rotten Tomatoes. I am so pleased to have you available.
Kyle, have you been watching anything fun this last week?
My wife and I are still working through Marvel because she randomly decided that she wanted to watch it a couple months ago. And so we've just finished WandaVision, and next up would be Loki. But then she decided that she wanted to get into gaming. And so I've been watching her dive headfirst into Breath of the Wild. And it has been a dream of mine to have a gamer wife. It's really exciting, but it's also really frustrating because she doesn't have the decades of gaming experience that I do. And so she doesn't recognize when the game is trying to tell her something or to like tell her to do something. And so I'm just sitting there like,
if it makes her feel any better, you can tell her that Zelda goes all the way back to when Gary was in his 20s.
Zelda's my thing.
I couldn't beat it then.
of easier now.
Yeah, I would agree with Kyle. I would say they're much easier now. I've been able to go back and play the original Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2, and oh, they're just so difficult. Just having
they are easier for gamers for sure, but for Evia, it is her first time controlling something in a 3D space. So the older games is top down, and you've got like left, right, up, down, and attack. And now, like Breath of the Wild in particular, has a really complex control scheme for switching your shields and arrows and bows and like everything that you can do. And so there's that, plus learning to use the camera to look around. So there is a lot more complexity there, even if the game itself is simpler for an experienced gamer.
Interesting.
That is actually also a valid point. Yeah, it really just depends on when you're jumping in.
Well, the blurring between film and video games, and that's another topic for another show, but you really are touching on something interesting, Kyle, and that is that amalgamation between home theater and video gaming and how those lines are becoming blurred. We become our own directors, which actually feeds into our featured topic.
That would be a great
particularly,
topic. Another one if you want to make a note of that.
Particularly in a game like Breath of the Wild. Because Breath of the Wild really is that game that lets you play it the way you want to, more than any other Zelda game before it. And I actually, just a few weeks ago, started replaying it myself because I am tired of waiting for the sequel.
I don't know. Isn't that like Star Trek 5 just because you couldn't bear to wait for Star Trek 6? Or is that just a really poor analogy because it was just that many years ago?
I don't get it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any ageist jokes are always welcome among friends.
Well, that's what we've been watching, and I guess playing as well for some of us. And I'm going to pull everyone away from the regular show for just 1 second to give an update on the weekend box office to wrap up the news. So, opening this weekend at number 1 was the Brad Pitt action thriller Bullet Train with an estimated 30.1 million. Dropping from first to second, DC League of Super Pets brought in just a little over 11 million. Dropping from second to third, Jordan Peele's Nope, bringing in just under 8.5 million. Dropping from third to fourth, Thor Love and Thunder, bringing in 7.7 million, bringing its domestic total north of 316 million, which now officially makes it the highest grossing Thor film here in the United States, surpassing Thor Ragnarok. Dropping from fourth to fifth is Minions: The Rise of Gru, bringing in a little over 7.1 million with a domestic total of 334.6 million, still doing very well. Dropping from fifth to sixth is Top Gun: Maverick, bringing in a little over 7 million. And despite the fact that it's continuing to drop, it's still holding up well enough that it has made an estimated 662.5 million and has officially surpassed Titanic to become the 7th highest grossing film domestically. What an achievement for the Tom Cruise action film. Dropping from 6th to 7th, Where the Crawdads Sing, bringing in approximately 5.6 million. Opening at number 8 this week is Easter Sunday, bringing in an estimated 5.25 million. Dropping from 7th down to 9th is Elvis with 3.94 million. And rounding out the top 10 this week, dropping from 8th to 10th, is The Black Phone, the horror film from Scott Derrickson, bringing in an estimated 1.46 million. I actually managed to catch The Black Phone this weekend after we recorded the episode the other day, so I can add that now to the list of stuff I watched this last week. And I can safely say to horror fans out there, it's definitely a good one to check out and is officially one of my favorite films of the year. So that is it for the box office numbers for the week of August, the weekend, I should say, of August 5th through 7th. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming with Gary, Kyle, and we're about to get into the big stuff. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the show. But it's time to move on to the main story. We're going to talk today about fan edits, which means I'm going to sit back and I'm going to guide everyone through the questions, because this is going to be a learning experience for me, because this is a world that I think is fascinating, but I know very little about, and I have not tried to edit anything since I tried to slap some random video game trailers together with James Bond music way back in my college years. And that was on, oh gosh, was it it was on a Windows 7 PC, and we've come quite a ways since the dark ages of Windows 7. So I'm going to kick us off here with, the big question that we should start with here, and I'll shoot it straight to Kyle. Kyle, what exactly is a fan edit?
Well, we know about director's cuts, when movies are released with changes made after the initial release, sometimes with longer or previously missing scenes. These are released to tell the same story in a slightly different way. In music, we call it remixing, where artists take existing music and augment or modify it to put their own spin on a track. Not to mention, of course, mashups, fanfics, and Rule 34. So this form of artistic expression, where fans take an existing work and change it in some way, is only new in the sense that lay people haven't really had access to easily manipulatable digital copies of major motion pictures. A fan edit is any change made by someone who is not officially related to the film. Sometimes a fan edit can be as small as changing the music in a single scene. Sometimes it involves moving the film's scenes around, restructuring it to make it flow better. And sometimes it's as big as turning an entire TV series into a single feature-length motion picture to be consumed in a single sitting.
And I love that we are entering an age in television where long-form storytelling in television isn't a new thing, but the whole idea of taking a television series and making it a mini-series that is almost practically like 2 movie lengths long, that has become a huge thing, more so in this century. I think popularized by shows like Lost, or just about anything that HBO had going for it in the early part of the century. They really popularized the idea of this TV series is about getting from point A to point B and not getting lost in the middle with the, random action episode of the week type of thing. Because, I think back to, like, what would a fan edit of, like, the original X-Files TV show be like? I'm like, oh, that'd be rough. Because that one, for all the long-form storytelling it did, particularly toward the end, you still have so many episodes in between that you would have to just leave out. But, nowadays we have plenty of content from Marvel and from Star Wars that fits very well into the concept of, we can take this and we can tell a slightly different story with it. Gary, do you have anything to add about what a fan edit is? I think Kyle covered it extremely well.
Kyle comes at it also from a producer's point of view, and I look at fan edits from the consumer's point of view. I have no more skill with video editing software than I have with quantum mechanics, but what I do have the ability to do, as so many discerning moviegoers do, is have the ability to tell a good story from a really horrible one. Kyle used the phrase fanfics, F-I-X, and indeed that was my original attraction to the genre of fan edits. From an academic point of view, can we take a mediocre film and make it better? Can we make a really good film and make it nearly perfect? Or in the case of a fanfics, because time is the enemy of many films, can we actually reframe the narrative or reframe the effects with modern technology to be able to tell a better story? And ultimately, from my point of view, that's the ultimate goal of a fan edit, is to further the original scriptwriter's effort to tell a compelling story. If the scriptwriter sucks, well, then it's an effort to fix a bad script. But oftentimes it's tweaks. And I find that some films respond really well to those small tweaks rather than a wholesale shift in tone throughout the entire picture.
I'll just jump right into the next question then. And I'll address this to Kyle first again. What drew you to the world of fan editing? And if you do your own edits, why?
Great question. Why do I do this? So during high school and college, it was a major project of mine to digitize and edit my family's home videos. We had hours and hours of footage across dozens of VHS tapes, and we had problems finding, like relocating those iconic moments that we kept quoting because they were lost in the sea of mediocre film and unremarkable memories that no one would ever return intentionally to watch. I've always had a mind for streamlining, simplifying, and reducing redundancies. So I honed my editing skills by cutting the fat from those home videos. Sometime after Revenge of the Sith came out, news broke that the actor Topher Grace, had edited the 3 Star Wars prequels into a single movie that he called The Phantom Edit. And I thought that was the most fascinating concept. It reportedly started at the end of episode 1, where Darth Maul kills Qui-Gon, spoilers, chops out most of episode 2, and then focuses its runtime primarily on episode 3. So one could see and understand the overarching story of the trilogy in less than 2 hours. Now, to my knowledge, the Topher Grace's edit has never actually been released, but others have recreated it based on those reports, and I have a copy of one of those versions. Learning that this kind of thing was even possible, that these stories aren't immovably set in stone, was eye-opening, and I have been intensely interested in it ever since.
Gary, what drew you to the world of fan editing?
There are a lot of really bad films out there that have a lot of potential. And what I ended up doing was becoming attracted to films that are part of my history, but are clearly imperfect. And once the technology got to the consumer level, where individuals that had sufficient hardware could literally import these films from media and put them into their workstation of choice, and actually, although not having all of the individual film edits or film elements, I should say, they do have access to sometimes alternative audio cuts that are embedded in the media. They will have edits, access to deleted scenes or extended scenes that were never intended to be included in the final cut of the film, but upon reimagining the narrative, they actually work better sometimes and further the original story. From my point of view, there are some directors, George Lucas, that get so tied up in the minutia of telling their story, the minutia of how the ships look or the costume design, the production design, etc. There's so many moving parts in a production as big as that despite the commitment to tell an overarching story, it sometimes gets lost. And a set of dispassionate or really passionate third eyes that can see clearly what the main director just could not see. Why don't you see this? An editor like Kyle, who has both the talent and the vision, can see what is there and trim away everything that doesn't belong. And so what we get through virtue of the technology and an alternative vision is an alternative vision of the final film that can sit alongside the final product or often be actually better than the final product. And that's what fascinates me the most, is how can you take a good product and by having a pair of eyes that are clearly fan-based but have a sense of logic to them that's different from the original film production crew, they create something better and unique.
I just want to say, Kyle, I wish that we had met long ago so that you could have a chat with my dad, who passed away a few years ago. But my dad is the most forgiving person in the world when it comes to mediocre and terrible films, because he can watch something like, he and I went and saw Batman versus Superman together, and I walked away from it thinking, "Oh, I'm never gonna buy this." And the second it came out, my dad rushed out and bought it anyway, even though he knew, like, this isn't a great film. But he'd have these like hours-long conversations with me about, what if this, what if that, what if all we had to do was take out this one scene, change a little bit of this, and it's like, you know, having this conversation, suddenly it all makes sense. It's like, oh man, if my dad were, you know, brilliant on a computer, which he was most assuredly not, I guarantee that I'd probably have seen several fan edits by now. But I think it's just fascinating that that's just a thing now that I can think about. I'm like, oh yeah. So
Gary, I'm going to ask you, if I may interject,
yeah.
From your point of view, and especially since Ben, you had mentioned the DC universe, aren't Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon really A-list fan editors at this point with DC properties?
Oh, I would certainly, I would not say Joss Whedon is, because
his cut of the original
League
film, though. Zack did.
Well, in the sense that they are fans and they're editing, yes, but they are also officially affiliated with it.
Yeah.
They're really well-paid fan editors.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're well paid. Yeah.
I wasn't going to get into this, but then you also have the canon question, especially for these ongoing series. Is something that happened in the director's cut canon, or are we sticking with the theatrical release? You know, you blur the lines there.
Yeah. Always interesting. I know that Warner Brothers' official stance on the Snyder Cut is that it is not canon. They will not even allow snippets of it to be used for the purposes of documentation. So, you know, it's always an interesting philosophy where, yeah. So, Kyle, do you prefer to seek out fan edits? Do you like to take the job in your own hands, or do you like to do a little bit of both?
As with any hobby, there are communities out there for fan editing. I primarily use the subreddit, and it can be fun to see how other people approach the material, what kind of weird ideas they bring to the table, but I obviously prefer to do the work myself. A big part of the project is really just the challenging myself to see if I even can. It can be a real puzzle to edit something. I have been hit with major narrative problems mid-edit. And when I solve that problem by reordering a scene or maybe sticking a line back in, it is a moment of triumph. And that's when I start running around the house shouting, "I'm brilliant!" at my wife and dog.
Well, Gary, I know you don't do the edits the way Kyle does, so I imagine you like to seek them out, though, and see what people do with them.
I do. And what makes it fascinating for me is, again, taking bad decisions during the filmmaking process and seeing what can be done to improve upon that situation. I think one of the best examples that I can cite is The Abyss. One easily thinks of Jim Cameron as a jerk. I'm sorry, that was not appropriate. One thinks of Jim Cameron as a phenomenal filmmaker, but his steps into long form cinema were not met with the most receptive of arms. I think it was Columbia or TriStar that released The Abyss. And in either case, it was so long before Avatar came out and before he had the kind of street credentials that Terminator 2 gave him in 1991. Here's this film in the late 80s that's tipping the scales at a feature length that they couldn't make enough money in their estimation in its first run in the theaters, knowing full well that we didn't have the type of home video and streaming that we do today to supplement the revenue stream. So they made the judicious decision without Jim Cameron's consent to chop the film, basically taking a picture that was this tight, confined thriller, and all of a sudden in the third act it makes this left turn into ET, and it's a real shocker. Well, Jim Cameron comes in well after the fact, once the film lost money, made a modest profit in its first run, but they recognized they had an opportunity to re-release the film on Laserdisc in a widescreen format, with Jim Cameron having final cut on the film. This is all new at the time in the early 90s. And they released this lavish making of to go along with the picture. And that sort of began this trend of using physical media to enhance the revenue options on an IP, because they can enhance it with added value. Well, the added value, it turned out, with this particular property was reinserting what made the last act make sense. And I won't throw out any spoilers, because a 4K release of the pictures in Jim Cameron's version is finally going to make a release soon, they keep saying. But the point here is that in that intervening time, from 1988 to today, fan editors have had an opportunity to take this property and do something with it to make that last act make sense by using a combination of the theatrical edit and Jim Cameron's director's cut, and create something brand new. So as a consumer, it's fascinating to me how you can take an X-Acto knife and Scotch tape, metaphorically speaking, and recreate something new from something that already exists, which from my point of view, composers have been doing for centuries. Why not with film?
I'm just going to jump in here really quick to silence the trolls who will, could comment on this. It was Fox that released The Abyss.
Thank you. Which makes sense, since Fox has released every single Jim Cameron product ever since, right? Now Disney.
Not Terminator or Terminator 2. I think those are the only two big ones that.
Terminator was Carolco, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I can't remember who did T2, but I think the current distribution rights might be at Columbia for that. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure though. That's one of those ones that keeps jumping and changing hands. So,
which actually ties into what Kyle was saying, is that when you have streaming properties that change distribution houses so often, it's a moving target in the streaming world. How do you get to the IP? And which version of the IP do you get to? Do you get to a media version? Do you download? Oops, can you do that from a streaming service to? And which one do you use? Boy, that's. I don't know how they do it. I honestly don't, but I know how to seek them out.
So, Kyle, how often do you actually watch a film or TV series? And when does the little light bulb pop on? How often does that happen, that there's a better version of this out there and I can do this?
Pretty much whenever I'm bored of something I'm watching. I'm idly thinking about editing anything that I watch. I started working on editing the first season of The Mandalorian into a movie, but after downloading, importing, and building a rough cut of the film, I hopped onto the fan edit subreddit and discovered that it had already been done approximately 600 times in almost exactly the same way that I was going to do it, because there's a very clear structure to that season. So I abandoned the edit, but it is something that I'm looking at in anything I watch. So if I am bored by something, I'd think, I would have cut that out in the edit. Maybe I'm not actually going to, but I would have cut that out if I were editing it. Or if I finish something and I'm like, wow, that was great. I want to be able to share that with my sister, who's got a 4-year-old child and doesn't have time to watch a whole show. But I want to consolidate that so that she can enjoy it in a single sitting. That is when I'm thinking about how I could chop it up.
Gary, how often do you finish a show or a movie and think, even if I'm not going to edit this myself, surely there's a better version of it out there?
Whenever something comes up and I go, oh my God, that was such a miss. So close, so close. But when an editor clearly has a reaction like Kyle does, I'm in a room, literally the room adjacent to where I am now, going, there's going to be an editor that's going to get their hands on this and make this the way it should be. And sure enough, whenever I think that, someone does it. A few days later, you can log into one of the subreddits. Yep, sure enough, somebody did exactly what I thought should have been done. And it improves the product so consistently that it's fun occasionally to jump in and immediately watch the fan edit while the original cut is still fresh, just to see what they did with it. And occasionally what I'll also do is some fan editors are really good at what I would refer to as technical documentation, where they'll take a very verbose approach to documenting in long form what it is specifically that they did. And some will actually include time indexes from time to time, saying this is how much that I cut out. And part of that is a script log for them so that they keep their place. And the rest of it is for people like me who nerd out on the changes. But it's fascinating to look at from that point of view as well, from a viewer standpoint, not someone who's digging in with the minutia and dealing with time codes and such.
Sometimes those notes are more interesting than just watching the thing.
Yeah,
just cool to conceptualize.
One of the first fan edits that I really fell in love with was Adiwan's, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, fan edit of Star Wars. And that original fan edit is so good, and the documentation is so meticulous. You can read the PDF while watching the film, and it's better than just watching the film or watching the film with George Lucas going yeah 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 in the background. It's fascinating to see how these editors go through and meticulously will make the slightest of changes to just a few frames for timing, for effect, for color timing. It's just mind-blowing, the attention to detail that they have. And when you read it, you can appreciate it, because sometimes it's so fast that just you blow right through it and you didn't know that a change was made.
Well, this next pair of questions is going to be specifically directed to Kyle, since he's our expert here. All right, Kyle, what are your goals when creating your fan edit?
So I have to admit, like Gary, I actually really dislike watching TV shows. It is such a time commitment. By their nature, TV shows have to be inflated to hit arbitrary runtimes, which means filler content and the need for that 3-act structure with some kind of climax in every single episode. I prefer a shorter total runtime that tells a clean, self-contained story. So my goal with these edits is to save other people time by lowering the barrier for entry. If there's a cool story that's bogged down by unnecessary bloat, I want to cut that bloat away to tell the story as efficiently as I can, so that others like me, who maybe don't have the time or interest to watch all 4 seasons of a cartoon like Star Wars Rebels, can experience some of the best moments in the Star Wars canon without any of the childish filler. But there's an artistry to this too. The editor needs to be able to step back and analyze what the audience needs to know. I never watched Breaking Bad, but I kept hearing how amazing it was. So I was excited to find that someone had made a 2-hour cut of the series. But it relied very heavily on voiceover. And by the end, I still didn't really have any idea what was going on. I couldn't have watched that and said, yes, I have seen Breaking Bad, for the water cooler conversations. At the end, I was still in the dark. So another goal I have is always to create something that would allow a brand new viewer to say, I understand the story of such and such series now.
Avoiding throwing the baby out with the bathwater during the narrative cuts.
So, Kyle, are there any particular types of stories, genres, or franchises that you're drawn to when it comes to editing?
Yeah, Star Wars, almost exclusively. Because those are the stories that I really want to share with people. But more broadly, I'm looking for finite, compelling stories that I can compress into less than 2 hours. I've been ideating on turning each of the Marvel movies into a half-hour episode so that somebody who has to catch up on 20, 30 movies now could quickly do it. But it wouldn't make sense to, for example, try to turn a season of Rick and Morty into a movie, since each episode is a standalone adventure. So similarly, I also steer away from sitcoms because the overarching story is ancillary to the situational comedy in the moment. But I want to emphasize the fact that the story needs to be compelling. I was certainly thinking about how I'd edit Book of Boba Fett, but when I got to the end, I realized that I genuinely didn't care if anyone else saw it. I was so bored by it that I didn't see any value in pouring 20 plus hours into editing it.
So when you're editing, Kyle, how do you decide what to cut, and are there ever sequences that you've cut that you felt this sequence is actually good on its own merit, but it doesn't add anything to the final vision I have for this?
Yeah, naturally, there is a reason why editors exist. Creatives can get carried away in their vision, or it could just be too long, not very well shot. In writing, we're told to kill our darlings, which means that writers sometimes need to cut some of their favorite scenes or characters to better tell their story. Less can be more in storytelling. So yes, there are sacrifices that I have to make in every single edit. One of my most recent projects was turning season 1 of The Bad Batch into a movie. And there's this phenomenal moment where one of the clone captains steps in front of his squad's blasters and talks about how far they've fallen since their days serving the Republic. But this moment takes place in a conflict on a planet that I had completely cut because it didn't progress the overall narrative. So there was no reason for the main characters to be there to witness this scene. So it had to go. I start by reverse engineering the story. No matter what I have before, no matter how long or short the movie is itself, knowing how the story ends means that I know what the audience needs to know in order to get there. Then I identify the standout moments that I want to include, and then it's just a matter of weaving it all together to reduce the runtime as much as possible. Let me give you an example of why it is so important to know the end, to wait until the series is done. There's an episode in season 2 of Star Wars Rebels that was pure, unadulterated filler. It has an absolutely ridiculous premise and has no ties to the overarching story. So it was the first on the chopping block. And then it turned out, 2 seasons later, that the series finale relied on that episode. So I had to find a way to stick this random episode from season 2 back into the season 2 movie in order to make the finale make sense.
Lesson learned?
Well, that could be a problem going forward with, every series that we have that big question mark looming over our heads. Is this the end of the series? I wonder. I wonder what is going to happen next with Obi-Wan. If we're done with that, or if there's going to be something that happens in the future that is going to inform future edits of season 1.
Now, I'm genuinely happy with my edit. I think that whatever I cut deserves to go, and will, even if it comes back to play later. There have been instances where something that I've edited out does come back to play later, but in such a way that you don't need the additional context from the beginning. So that's also viable. A lot of the things that I cut from Kenobi were things that were told better in other stories. We had a whole spoiler cast about this. I'm not going to talk about that anymore.
Where am I at? Okay. So, Kyle, have you ever had to desire to make a longer cut? And if you had, what do you do? How often do you have viable assets to make that possible?
Yeah, how do you stretch something out when you only have so much material? That is a fantastic question, and there are several schools of thought. Some editors use deleted scenes or digitally augment footage, or even hire sound-alike voice actors to record new lines. The version of the Topher Grace prequel that I have, for example, includes a deleted scene from episode 2 featuring Padme's family on Naboo. The film quality of the scene is noticeably worse since it was never actually polished and finished, but it helps provide necessary exposition that would otherwise have required a longer workaround. And, every second counts here. Some editors even string together content from different mediums, like sticking scenes from the animated Clone Wars series into the live-action Kenobi edits. I've always found that really jarring. I don't like to take things from the disparate, I don't like to mash together different styles. So, or consider the Hobbit trilogy. Here's another way that they edit. So in the second movie, there's this whole sequence where the dwarves have to avoid Smaug while melting gold into this colossal statue, which then melts all over Smaug, sending him into this goopy golden rage where he flies out of the cavern to burn Lake Town. Now, if we're editing this trilogy into a movie, we know that we need to have Smaug flying out to Lake Town, because that's kind of a big part of the third movie, which means that we need to have the unnecessary golden statue sequence to explain why he's dripping with gold when he leaves. But some editors got together and actually color corrected the film and digitally removed the golden goop. so they could cut the entire statue sequence. Now, I can chop up a film like nobody's business, but changing the actual picture is beyond my skill level at the moment. And I just think that is so cool. But there is a fine line here. When it comes to recording entirely new dialogue, for example, to make a character say whatever you need them to say to get through that scene, I kind of think that's cheating. It's a really cool experiment, but it's, for my goals, I think it's cheating. Personally, in my projects, I am a purist. I work pretty much exclusively with what I'm given in the final release. I'm not usually interested in making longer cuts because my goal is to tell an existing story more quickly.
I'm champing at the bit, Ben. Can you tell?
Oh, yeah.
Kyle, when you're referring to actually changing the picture, that's when it's no longer fan editing. You're actually rebooting or remaking a film, even though you're using minor changes as justification. From my point of view, if you're a film editor like Adiwan, going back to Star Wars Revisited, and you're adding a digital effect to, say, the medical drone that's in the prison sequence when Han Solo is about to be tortured. There is a sequence in which an electrical effect is added to the needle. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a really good digital effect that's added to a 43, 45-year-old property now. And it does enhance the imminent threat in the narrative. And so it's a good insertion. But from my point of view, that's no longer an edit. That's added value to the film. That's something new. And it transcends edit. And you use the word purist. So there are two versions of that very same film. There's Adiwan's original edit, and then there's the purist edition of the edit, which does not insert anything new, just edits from the existing content. What's your view on that, and what should it be called if it's new material?
Well, I think that by definition, it's still an edit because it is editing the film, okay, regardless of whether it's changing the image or just cutting the film. And I guess I want to clarify, I'm a purist in that I use the scenes that are in the original. So Kenobi, for example, when they do the flashback, there are edits that de-age Anakin. And I think if I were to go back and revisit this, I would use the de-aged edits in my edit, a little bit of a collaboration, take the effect that they added, in this case, spark on that droid. I would use that because it's a cooler version of the final product. So I'm just not interested in like adding a deleted scene or weaving from other mediums. I just want to tell the story from this one block of content.
More than one way to do the same thing, and it's creating something new either way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Kyle, you actually kind of addressed this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to ask again. Have you ever watched something, wanted to make your own edit, but felt like there was just no way to salvage it in a satisfactory way?
The entire community is absolutely racking their brains about making a movie out of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. I desperately wanted to crack that absolute train wreck. And I have a couple of ideas on how to do it, but the movies are just so fundamentally broken that there's no way to create a satisfactory resolution with the pieces we were left. Specifically, Rise of Skywalker. You can make an edit of a story that was planned, but Rise of Skywalker by itself played like a bad fan edit itself. It was so terrible. So, trying to string all three of those pieces where the directors are basically fighting amongst each other into one thing is probably going to be impossible without edits. That is one of the things where they hire voice actors to make Kylo Ren say something else. Gary, you actually suggested that I edit WandaVision. And the stylistic differences between the first several episodes, I thought would be really tough to reconcile. And that's a show that I honestly think is worth watching in its entirety. So yeah, I remain open for ideas on the sequel trilogy.
I will not try to crack that nut. It's wow. You couldn't have articulated it any better. Blue milk forever.
Yeah. Gary, even though you don't do your own edits, have you ever watched something and thought, surely there's a great edit out there, and then sort of given up on the whole notion that there could be?
Yeah, actually. One got close, and I'll have to go to the Star Trek canon, to the original motion picture. That Bob Wise film is such a bloviated piece of pretentious wanker crap. I don't know how you could sell it, because it's a 30-minute episode in a 2-hour picture. It relies so much on the gee whiz, cheese whiz special effects of 1979 and trying to ape what they accomplished so well in Star Wars and make it grandiose and slow, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, that it just drowns. And I have yet to see a cut that actually trims enough. Reunion is the name of a fan edit of the original Star Trek, the motion picture, that came really, really close. But Kyle, like you said, it relies so heavily on disparate source material. It pulls you out of the story the second you drop into a 480p from a beautiful 1080p color corrected cut of the film. But unfortunately, it would take the studio with access to the original elements and be able to clean them up to actually make that story worth telling. And it wasn't a great script to begin with, but it was worth salvaging, and it did come close. But as far as I'm concerned, that is one picture that cannot be saved.
Kyle, what does it take to make a fan edit?
Patience. Patience, a sizable hard drive, and the comprehensive knowledge of the content you're shaping. I actually briefly tried playing with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, making that trilogy into a movie, but I found that I didn't know the story well enough to make editorial decisions. You also need to naturally know your video editing software. When an editor has done their job well, you don't even notice. Virtually every single cut requires an audio fade, or else you get those jarring audio jumps. And honestly, making an audio crossfade sound authentic can sometimes be the hardest part.
Yeah, because you don't have access to the final mix of the picture, the final audio mix, is that generally how you crossfade into one scene to another, is using audio fade in and outs to seamlessly blend the score?
Yes, almost invariably that is how I fix every cut. So I make my rough cuts and I put the scenes where I want them, and then I go back through and polish it to make each scene flow into each other, so I don't have to worry about structure in that point. Mm. On some occasions, like in Kenobi, I actually find the score, the actual recording of the music, and I export it and add it if I need to. So if there is a way where I cannot salvage this, or maybe this scene has audio in the background, but I want the music, I can get just the soundtrack and add that instead.
So you can use music cues from the audio CD, just import those WAV files and then insert them sans the effects and audio tracks, dialogue tracks, where it's appropriate to crossfade from one scene to another. Again, it's another editor's trick, and something that they would do in the studio with the original source material.
Mm-hmm. When you're crossfading, one of the things that really annoys me the most is, I end my scene here and I drag the audio past it a little bit more, and then I add the fade so it fades out. But the audio from the next scene picks up too quickly. So in Star Wars, it's a big problem where the music fades out in the previous scene, and then suddenly as we get to the next scene, we hear a spaceship sound where there is no spaceship on screen. So I've got to trim it even more, and then I maybe trim the scene back. So it's a balancing act. Jenga, to your point.
I love the point you made, Kyle. And this is something that's not just fan edits. This is just film in general. When the editor does their job right, you shouldn't notice. The only reason that people like us notice is because it's what we do. We look at film. When I hear that something like Birdman was done to make it look like it was done in 1 or 2 takes, it's I look for those moments, where does he enter a dark room and then come back out into the light? That's the cut.
1917.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or Children of Men.
Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but filmmakers, that's a way overstep. Film appreciators like ourselves, those that have studied film, we know what we're looking for. We're just as fascinated about the aspects of the making of the picture as we are with the final product. But the average audience goer, when they're diving into the theater, they don't necessarily have to be apprised of the gimmick. If the filmmaker is using it as a technique and it doesn't come off as a gimmick inside the theater, then the director has done their job. The filmmakers have done their job. Alluding to your point, Kyle, which is editing should be seamless. You should not notice it in the theater.
I'm thinking of the hallway scene in Inception, where they actually built the rotating hallway,
yes.
or what is it, Space Odyssey, when they're looking down and the person like walks around the entire station.
Right.
Those moments where the audience is just thinking, well, that's a cool visual, not really thinking like, how did they do that? My dad said that my grandfather, when watching, would have said, if you were to see like the old Chipmunks movie that was CG, he would have asked, how did they get the chipmunks to talk? So yeah, as we're watching it, we're looking for those things. And I love the one shots. I love those. That's what I did from the Playhouse music video last year, doing it all in one shot, just to amplify the magic and the craft of cinematography.
So if you get a scene like, and this is again just three movie nerds geeking out here, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the stewardess on this Pan Am American flight, literally we take the time as we're listening to Strauss and the filmmaker's choice to watch this character literally turn 180 degrees and then walk. So as as film appreciators, we know the trick. We know how they did it. It was done in Royal Wedding many years earlier. It's taking the set and turning it upside down, and the camera turns with it. But in this scene, it's not consequential to the story, but we would never, ever cut it. Is that because the film is sacrosanct, or is that because it's just really good filmmaking and the long shot tells the story and we just don't appreciate it yet? How do you decide as you're watching a film, that's just too long and it needs to go, or it's not necessary to tell the story, but it has to stay? How do you decide that?
Yeah, it goes back to what I want the viewer to see, what I want them to take away from it. So if I'm watching a movie and like the long shot is just a fantastic example of the craft, I would sort of earmark that as one of the standout moments that I want to share with the audience and find a way to weave into the narrative. I would just account for it in my runtime. But if the scene it's in just genuinely doesn't serve, then that would be one of the darlings I have to kill.
Yeah.
So it would go, and I usually say, like, if you liked this edit, check out these episodes. You know, this would tell you more about this character or more about this, rather than like just say, well, watch the rest of it and you'll get it. Or for a full movie, yes, go watch the whole movie. If you enjoyed this, there's more like it.
But if you're cutting for the sake of efficiency of telling this narrative story, you can't be precious about the darlings, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Good topic, Ben. This is great. Thank you for allowing me to ask a few questions too, because as a consumer, I see what's happening on the screen and I like it, but it's nice to know the background of the decision-making behind it. And I think that your viewers especially will be able to appreciate a fan edit with new eyes with Kyle's chair here.
You're going to cut all his questions, right?
I hope so. Let's go straight to the answers. It's much more important.
Yeah. Answers without context makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go on record here, since you two mentioned you haven't seen Love and Thunder yet. I'm going to admit the shame. I have yet to see 2001.
Oh, okay.
It's weird,
but it definitely is that. I'm not precious about the film. It is weird.
My philosophy whenever that comes up is, whatever, y'all. I've seen like 50 pre-1950s horror films that no one else in my friend group has seen, and many of them are classics. So you know what? Whatever.
Ooh, let's do one on Annihilation.
Oh,
I'll talk about that all day.
Oh man, what a film that is.
Sorry, carry on.
No, it's all good.
Kyle, do you see editing as a healthy way for a community to interact with the stories they enjoy?
Imagine me saying no.
You asked a closed-ended question, Ben. How dare you?
Absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely it is. So it's a hobby that people do for free. And there are many collaborations between editors with different skill sets. Just like writing a fan fiction, it's a way for fans to engage with content they care about in a new way, or expose others to content that they might not otherwise watch.
I only ask because, there are toxic elements to every community, but I think that the core values of every community are what we should be focusing on. And I think that's the important thing that you just brought up. So, always engage in a healthy way.
Yeah, and even if you don't intend to share, like I'll post my edits on the subreddit. I'm really proud of these things. I poured my heart and soul into these, and it gets a couple upvotes. Nobody really cares about the Good Omens edit that I did, but I'm really proud of it. It's a labor of love, and it's a great exercise for me, who ties a lot of his self-esteem into online approval, to just like make for the sake of creation. So yeah, I'd call it an exceptionally healthy way to interact with content.
Gary, I'll jump this one to you first. What is your favorite fan edit that you have watched?
My favorite fan edit is a 2-movie cut of The Hobbit, the second trilogy. Please forgive me for not recalling the name of the edit, but I should have done that homework beforehand. But it is the only one that cuts the film into two-hour films. And what it does is it takes a bloviated mess, a CG nightmare, including that ridiculous river run scene with the dwarves. And it just cuts all of that mess out so that what we can get to is Bilbo's adventure. And forget all of the gee whiz CG aspects of the picture and the brooding that some of the dwarves do, and the existential story extensions that are just ridiculous to the paper thin novel that it's based upon. It becomes less of a Peter Jackson ego fest and much more, this was the story that was originally intended to be told. And I enjoy that infinitely better. And I'm not committed to 8 hours. I'm committed to only 4.
Would you call that an ego project? Because he was sort of like strong-armed into making that a trilogy.
Yeah, that is very true. And it's not, if not Peter Jackson's ego, he is low-hanging fruit in terms of being able to levy my ire. What this was a mess that was created by the studio that strong-armed him into making films that added more money to the coffers for future Weta projects. I get that. I understand it. He did the best that he could given the material that he had. He was given Final Cut, and he was given a lot of money. And sometimes that's not the best recipe. Sometimes the best recipe is one of economy, because you have to do it that way. Star Wars is a great example of that, using literally dogfight footage to frame for frame match the TIE fighter battles with the X-Wing fighters. That's economy.
For my money, the Rankin Bass Hobbit is the only cut that needs to exist.
It's beautifully animated. I will give it that. Wasn't that
again? That's a whole different story. Bakshi did
Wizards
the Lord of the Rings
and Lord of the Rings.
He did the Lord of the Rings movie, which basically put together the Fellowship and the Two Towers.
Been a while.
Kyle, what is your favorite fan edit that you've watched? And that's not yours.
I really like the ones that improve the special effects. Like Gary mentioned, I almost like reading the notes just to see what people changed about it, and then I enjoy watching because, again, time commitment. But the Hobbit edits that you mentioned are, I think you're talking about There and Back Again.
Yes, that's it.
Those I think are like the default way to watch the show. I've got edits of each of the sequel trilogy movies, and I feel like I'm never going to watch the actual cuts again, because I'd rather watch the edits that just make them better. Mm-hmm. The Hobbit movies, I'm never going to watch that trilogy again, but if I want to revisit it, I'm going to go back to the better version of it. But I like the ones that improve special effects, like the one I talked about, the Hobbit that removed the gold. There was also the deep fake of Kenobi that de-aged Anakin. It was perfect. There's a deep fake of Cad Bane in the Book of Boba Fett that made him look a little more closer to his cartoon counterpart and not like a pissed off pimple. So there are those edits of the Star Wars sequels that improve the flow of the movies, and they're so good that it doesn't even occur to you that they're edited. There's one of The Last Jedi that cuts Canto Bight out altogether, and you don't even realize it. So those are my favorites. There was also, I forgot about this. There was an edit of Captain Carter, or Agent Carter, that turns it into a movie. And for some reason, I watched it, and then for like a week after, I had convinced myself that I made it, even though I'd never actually seen the show. Don't know how that happened, but I liked it. It was one of those ones where like I watched it and now I feel like I've seen it.
And again, that's just a demonstration that the editor did a capable job of knowing the material backward and forward. That's a ton of content. That's 2 seasons. It should have been more. But for what it was, it accomplished the objective of taking really good material, eschewing the filler, and leaving what's left a really tight story arc. Yes, great example.
I actually do have a question about the Agent Carter cut. And, if you're watching or listening, this could be a spoiler. Does it keep the open-endedness of it, or does it actually give you a nice period to the story? Because that was my big complaint about Agent Carter, is that it just ended. And
it's been a bit. I don't remember exactly what the ending was, but I remember being satisfied by it.
Same.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out then. All right, this question is going to be for, actually, I need to answer this question because I do have a favorite fan edit, but I've never actually watched it because this is a very different way to go about it. So back in the 90s, before digital media was readily available to people at home, like I said, my dad was the type of person who would look at even terrible movies and say, I could do this, I could do that. Well, he actually did it with a movie that is incredibly well regarded. He did his own cut of The Bride of Frankenstein. And it's only about an 80-minute film. And he didn't cut anything. But the story is told in such a way in the original cut that it's almost like the difference between the Lord of the Rings films and books, where you jump back and forth between perspectives. But in this movie, it starts with a prologue. The prologue ends. It tells the story of Frankenstein. Then it cuts to the story of the monster. And then the 2 stories come together. And it doesn't really flow perfectly with the timeline because the monster at one point meets a blind man. The blind man takes him in. And then we cut to the next morning, but it's not the next morning. It's clearly been several months later because the monster is now speaking.
I blame Gene Hackman's
and it's a ha ha ha. Yes, I'm sure more audiences are familiar with Young Frankenstein. But it's a jarring cut for the monster to just be speaking in the next scene. And so what my dad did was, and what he did for the editing was, he recorded the VHS audio onto a cassette tape. And so he had the audio cut of Bride of Frankenstein, in which you have the prologue, and then it cuts to the monster's story up to the point where he meets the blind man, cuts back to Frankenstein's story, in which another character tells him the monster's been on the loose, for a while now, which now makes sense because you've heard it in the story, and then cuts back later to the monster and the blind man. And so you get that greater sense that time has passed. So that's my favorite because
love it.
Just, that connection back to my dad. And, it's one that I've listened to several times back when cassette tapes were still a thing. So that's my favorite. But I'm really interested now to just hop online and catch some of these fan edits because I do believe there's a better version of The Hobbit out there. I'm fascinated now to see a better version of The Last Jedi without the Canto Bight, because that was my biggest complaint about that film, was that entire sequence. I thought when I first saw that movie, was like, there's a great movie in here, and it's bogged down a lot in the middle with this random adventure that goes nowhere. So anyway, yeah. So
it's about failure, Ben.
Yeah.
It is. It's about failure and redemption. You're about to enter a whole new world.
Oh, Lordy.
Actors.
So we've talked about our favorite edits that we've watched, or in my case, listened to. But Kyle, what is your favorite edit that you have made yourself?
I didn't mention this before, but there's also, just in terms of like category of fan edit, there's also things that tell completely new stories using existing content. So the Truman Show, there's a really popular edit where it removes all of the outside elements and it just becomes Truman like going crazy because there's no context of him being in a TV show. Mm-hmm. So like, I love the idea of changing something entirely too, but my brain doesn't work like that. It's just like, how can I consolidate this? That as an organizer, that's how I do. But in terms of stuff that I've made, my pride and joy are my Rebels edits, the Star Wars Rebels project. I turned each season of Rebels into its own movie because Rebels has some of the best Star Wars moments in the entire canon, but they're held together by a lot of that childish filler. So my edits seamlessly string together all those phenomenal bits, and I have been told that they should be the default way to watch the show. I am also, to my knowledge, the only person to have made an edit of the Good Omens series. And I have a folder of my edits available for viewing. Ben, please remember to include a link in the show notes so folks can take a look.
Will do. Yeah, I've seen some of Kyle's work in action, and it is quite good. Side by side with what I originally saw, it's definitely a better way to experience the core story.
Rebels, it's got its, I wasn't kidding earlier when I said it's got its own folder, because it literally is the way to watch the series. I've got the series, of course, but if I need to revisit canon, I'm not going to go back to 5 seasons of Dave Filoni's work, as good as it is. I'm going to yours because it's a more efficient and vis-a-vis, as a result, because I've seen it before, a more enjoyable way to watch the film. And see, I'm even referring to it as a film now when on the revisit.
Thank you. And yeah, that reminds me. So the reason that I like to stick with just what we're given is because of the canon element. You know, if somebody is trying to catch up on Star Wars, I don't want to be throwing stuff that is not actually like part of that story. I want them to be able to watch what happened so that they could pick up on whatever happens next.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it is about time to start wrapping things up here. Gary, I'm going to go to you first. What are your final thoughts on fan edits?
I think fan edits are here to stay, number one. I don't think that they should have the persecutorial aspect of it from both the studios, the government, and the lawmakers need to back off if there is any active cases for such things. And I don't think there's anything that's making any major headway, because the studios, I think, are beginning to recognize that there is both an academic value and a storytelling value. And from a pure monetary aspect of it, they actually could curate some talent this way, because a lot of talented editors are finding their way by utilizing existing IP and becoming familiar with what are now evolving as commercial software, but on a consumer level machine. It's just the software can't develop any faster than the hardware is. In fact, it's gotten to the point where the hardware has accelerated faster than the software development. So you're getting basically commercial grade software at home, which means all of the tools for color correction and special effects and so forth are available at home. It is curation of an art in a different way. It could serve the studios by being a talent pool. It serves better telling stories by using story narratives more efficiently. It is an excellent means with which to have young people who are in college to encourage them to tell their own stories in an efficient way. There's a lot of wins here. And while none of us are actively advocating for piracy, I believe that fan edits have an indelible place in cinema for further telling stories in the future.
Kyle, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
So they actually did, Lucasfilm did hire the deepfake artist who improved the Luke Skywalker at the end of Mando 2 to work on, what happened? To work on the next appearance of Luke. And that's why it was so much better than the first time we saw him in The Mandalorian. Oh, it was Boba Fett, that's why. I was confused. There wasn't a season 3 yet. But yes, fan edits are just so deeply fulfilling for me as I'm watching this media, thinking like, if I want to revisit this, I want to go back to it in a much more concise form. Or if I want to share this with somebody, I want it to be much more approachable so that we can talk about it. I just love streamlining. It is something that I do across the board in all areas of my life. And so when I found out that I could streamline media, oh man, it was so exciting. And it is such a fun challenge just as a creative person to go in and see if I can make this convincing, if I can make it look like it was supposed to look like this from the get-go. So yeah, everything Gary said is absolutely right. It's a talent pool, and it's a community, and it is just a fulfilling art form. But legality is a really interesting question, because from the studio's perspective, like, what is it, fair use? It is their IP, but it is getting people to talk about their stuff and look at it in a different way. And if you own a copy of something, so if you own a CD, for example, you technically have the right to rip it and make it digital. If you have a DVD, you're not technically legally allowed to have a digital copy of that. You're not allowed to rip it. But if you buy a video game, you can create a ROM. Like, it is legally permissible to own a ROM if you physically own the game. But why is that not the case with movies? And so again, if something is not available or not readily available, I advocate piracy. Or for streaming, if something is streaming and I want to edit that, the only way that one could get it is through illegal means. But I don't see that as a problem. If you are paying for the subscription, like, you still have the right to see it and use it. And if you're not making profit off of it, if you're not selling your work, then you're just sharing your art with people. So it is a really interesting question legally, and there's definitely an argument on both sides. But that's where I fall. I'm maybe a scofflaw, but I want to engage with this stuff in a more meaningful way, and I want to share that with other people. So that's where I land.
All I'm going to say is, since I'm more on the outside looking in on this topic, is that I'm incredibly fascinated with just this entire community, and I'm really eager now to dig in to stories that, on my first experience seeing it either in a cinema or streaming or wherever, I thought, oh boy, I don't know if I'm ever going to want to revisit this again, even though there are elements of it that work so incredibly well.
The monster films and James Bond are actually genres in which fan editors have focused on. You'll have fan editors that focus only on the James Bond film franchise. And some of the work that they do, because they know those stories so well, is phenomenal. You're going to have a ball, if not go down a rabbit hole that will take you a long time to crawl out of.
I'm now actually trying to figure out in my head, all right, how can I cut Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace into one film, since they technically take place in literally back to back.
This is how it begins.
I would just skip Quantum of Solace. You do you.
Yeah, I know. I'm one of the very few advocates for that film. It's not great, but it's not. I don't think it's garbage. But yeah, I'm fascinated by it. I'm very excited to dig deeper into it. And that's all I have to say. And so it is time for trivia. I'm so sorry. Trivia this week, because I tend to tailor it towards the topic at hand. It was so difficult to come up with a good question this week. So my apologies. I do think this is going to be a tough one.
Just give the point to Kyle and let's call it a day.
No, I think this could be fair. I think you both have just as good a chance. What notable director has created his own fan edits of such films as Psycho, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and 2001: A Space Odyssey? I will note that these have he put them up on his website. His website has since gone down. So unfortunately, access to these cuts no longer exists, as far as I know. But is it Edgar Wright, J.J. Abrams, Alex Garland, or Steven Soderbergh?
No cheating. I'm not looking up anything because I'm down to 3. Now down to 2.
All right, Gary, I'm going to call on you for an answer.
All right, I'll say Alex Garland, and I'm just winging it.
That was also
right,
my answer, just because that seems like him. Although right.
All right, sweet. All right, so it's either rise or fall together in this case. And unfortunately, it is Steven Soderbergh.
Can I change my answer now?
Yeah, Edgar Wright. I'm going with Edgar Wright.
Yep. Same.
I'm sorry. In this case, this is an instance where I'm not going to allow you to edit your answers.
I want to fan edit my answer.
You're going to change it all in post anyway.
Yeah, right.
So,
Make
Kyle,
sure
you
de-age
are
me at the same time, will you?
Oh, Gary, you do not need to be de-aged. You're good. Let's see here. Kyle, you are still at 2 points. Gary, you're still at 2 points. Still trailing behind Jalen and Travis, who are at 5. So you're not trailing terribly. So there is still hope. All right. So that has been our fascinating conversation here about fan edits. Thank you to Gary. Thank you to Kyle. This has been episode 53 of the Sunday Matinee. I honestly cannot say when we'll be back again because I've got a show coming up. Life's about to get crazy. I don't know when I'll have free time. I do know that I still want to talk about Ms. Marvel. I still want to get an episode in on Severance. And I recently watched The Meg and realized I really want to do an episode about shark movies because there's so many of them, and they're just such a fascinating part of our cinematic culture these days. But for now, I'll simply say, have an excellent day, stay safe, and enjoy your movies.